Welcome to the first in our Destination Rural podcast series. I'm Peta Rutherford. I'm the CEO of the Rural Doctors Association of Australia. And for our first episode, I'll be joined by Dr. Adam Coltzau. Hi, Adam. Thanks for joining us on our Destination Rural podcast series, our first in our series, so we're very excited. Before we get started, I'd like to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the land we meet on tonight and pay my respects to elders past, present and emerging, and acknowledge any Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people who may be listening in to the first of our podcast series. So thanks, Adam. Welcome, and we'll get straight into it, if that's okay.
Thanks, Peter. Thanks for having me on.
We'll see how we go. All right. So just to, I guess, kick off the chat, we'll try and keep it pretty informal. But I guess just to understand a little bit about your background, where you grew up, and what drew you to rural medicine.
Well, I grew up in rural New South Wales. Grew up in Casino on the Northern Rivers, and my father was an ambulance officer. So we used to have lots of, dinner table talk and those sorts of chats about the exciting things and jobs he went out to and those sorts of things. I suppose, and that's what sparked my interest in medicine as a career. I thought if I didn't get into medicine, I could always be an ambulance officer like my dad. I always looked up to the stuff Dad did. Dad volunteered to teach first aid. He would do, often tell us sort of about different jobs he'd been on and those sorts of things. And so I suppose I always looked up to that as something to aspire to be able to help others and do your bit for the community, do your bit to help others. Our local doctor in Casino was a rural generalist who did operating, did anaesthetics and did surgery at the local hospital. And he was the guy you saw in ED when you got something in your eye or fall off your bike and broke your arm. And so I just assumed that that's what doctors did all over the place. And it wasn't until I eventually got into medicine that I realised not all doctors did that, except when I came out to St George as a medical student and I went, oh, here's a doctor that does all that. Here's a doctor who will give my anaesthetic, fix a broken bone and also look after hypertension and diabetic patients during the day. So I went, maybe I can get a job where I can do some general practice, do some ED and do some exciting stuff, as well as be able to go to theatre, deliver babies, fix broken arms, operate on people and do the jack of all trades rural generalist job.
So you mentioned St George and that's where you are now. How important was having a rural mentor? And I'm thinking it's Dr. Cameron Barzey that you've referred to.
Yeah, so Dr. Cameron Barzey was the medical superintendent here at St George. When I came out here as a medical student, he hadn't been here all that many years. He'd been here a year, I think, when I started as a medical student. And on my first day here as a medical student, I was a particularly nerdy and keen medical student who fronted up on his first day and went, well, I'll start seeing patients doing work now. So on my first day in St George, I arrived at 10 o'clock in the morning, checked into my accommodation and saw a patient at lunchtime and convinced them to let me stitch his head up from his bit of a minor bump on the head. And then I hung around and there was a delivery on. So my first patient in labour was here at St George. And I hung around for the delivery and asked very politely if I could see the delivery and be involved. And the lady was very happy to have a medical student come along, and that turned into a difficult instrumental delivery, the first delivery I'd ever seen, and it was a difficult instrumental delivery with a large PPH. So I thought this rural medical show is something a bit different, and this is fairly exciting, and this is not what I expected in my rural term. And Cameron and I tried to help out as much as I can and worked really hard, and he was my mentor all the way through until I finished medical school, and we stayed in touch. And he rang me up one day out of the blue 2 years later, 2 years after I graduated, and said, "Oh, you fancy doing a bit of relief work out here for me while I go overseas for 6 months?" So I came out and was the medical superintendent of St George as a rural reliever in my second year.
So you were thrown in the deep end a bit.
Yep, absolutely. I'd already done a bit of rural relief. I'd done my internship at Ipswich, and in my second year, all doctors back in my day did rural relieving. And so I did rural relieving at Boonah, Laidley and Esk, and then went on to do a sort of a secondment to Bow Desert for 6 months, and then went on to do a secondment at St George for 6 months.
So I guess in relation to those rural stints and being thrown in the deep end, is that how it still is now, or is there more support, more backup? Just because I know that is one of the things that, you know, a lot of medical students or junior doctors do worry about.
No, not anymore. Those days are well and truly gone. Medical students now are they still get to do a lot when they come out to a place like St George. They still get to do a lot of suturing, put cannulas in, take bloods, do lots of procedural stuff that they don't often get a chance to do, and they get to refine that, but they're much more supervised now. And a third or fourth year PHO coming out on rotation gets very closely supervised, always has a senior on call within 2 minutes away from the hospital. So different times now. It's a different environment, and you're very well supported now as a rural junior doctor working in a location like St George, where you're no longer sent to single doctor towns by yourself with no one on the ground for an hour or two like we did back in the day. I've got lots of back in the day stories. Back in my day, you know, we used to do that before breakfast. These sort of days, you're very well supported out in rural environments, and I'd like to think the PHOs that have come out and work for me now are very well supported. They always think they've had done it tough, but
plenty of hands-on clinical experience. And okay, you mentioned 2 minutes away, the support. So not so much about work, but I guess touching on your personal life a little bit. You're married with kids, so just interested in why St George and what are the benefits around St George, and your lovely wife Katrina, what does she do, and how does that all work with the family dynamic?
So we're really fairly lucky here at St George. St George isn't an overly big place. It's about 3,500 people. So it takes me a good 3 minutes sometimes in traffic to get home for lunch. So I get to go home for lunch, I wouldn't say every day because sometimes it's busy, but, 8 days out of 10 I would get to come home for lunch and have lunch with my wife. So my wife is a clinical coder, and she works from home and she works remotely. So we have lunch together most days. I get to leave for work 5 minutes before I'm due to be there and still make it on time and still make it ahead of most of the other people who turn up on time. if I get called in, I'm 5 minutes away, including getting dressed. I have had to go in at times in a bit of a hurry, and I have fronted up to the hospital in board shorts and I haven't quite gone in pajamas like someone did the other night, but I have fronted up in board shorts and thongs quite a few times in a bit of a hurry when you're on call on a weekend. We live on the edge of town. I've got a pretty nice place here. I'm not in Queensland Health accommodation anymore. When I first moved to town, I lived in Queensland Health provided accommodation, and then decided if I wanted to live in a nicer part of town, I needed to buy my own place. So I bought a place that was only 2 minutes walk away, and now I live 5 minutes at the most, maybe 3 minutes from the hospital on 5 acres out of town on the river. So we built a house 10 years ago, and I've got 2 boys, both of which now attend the local high school. Lots of people, and lots of rural doctors included, send their kids away to go to boarding school. We chose not to do that. I went to a public school as a kid, and my philosophy was a fairly simple one, and that's if the kids are going to do well at school, they'll do well at school, and if they're not going to do well at school, I'm not going to waste money sending them away to boarding school. So I figured that if they're going to do well at school, they'll do well no matter where they go. And I've found the local high school to be very good, and they are both doing quite well at the local high school. I attend the P&C meetings when I can and try and get involved in the kids at school. They went to local primary school, which was very good setup for them. They've got their mates, and on weekends we go camping, ride 4x4s and side-by-sides out in the bush, and those sorts of things. My wife, being able to work from home has been a big benefit from us. She previously worked at the local hospital in admin, and now still works for Queensland Health, but does it remotely and does a much bigger job for a different HHS. So that's worked out well.
With Katrina's job, did she have the skills when you first went to St George, or was it something that she had to, study or do a course in while she was in St George?
No, she was a health information manager when we met, and she needed to do a fairly significant upskilling course because she'd been out of the workforce for 10 years while we had kids, and so she did an online type course that she needed to attend. I think it was 4 placements in the city just over a week, and the rest of the stuff was all online and online exams and online learning to get the qualification she needed to re-enter the workforce. And then she's worked for a number of different organisations over the last 5 years that she's been back at work, and that's been going really well. And of course, she was working online before COVID hit, and then continues to work online and probably doesn't need to attend back to work very often once COVID's ended now. So that's worked out quite well for us.
Okay. You were talking a bit before about, the social activities that you do in St George and how you relax, but how important is it to every now and then leave town and get that break?
Yeah, no, that is really important. There's lots of stuff to do in most rural towns, and you can get really quite involved in a lot of sporting clubs, and there's every sport known to man in most rural places across Australia. But it is nice to be able to get out and get away to have a break from the fishbowl. So lots of times we talk about rural doctors being in the fishbowl. So when you're down the street and you do go shopping, it isn't uncommon. Well, in the early days, it used to happen to be more.
Now people know you're grumpy.
Now people know I'm grumpy. And one of the, people would stop you in the supermarket and say, "Oh, those test results back, Doc. that I've still got that bleeding. And one of the local GPs, I spoke to them about what to do, and one of the local GPs said to me, "Oh, yeah, no, look, you just ask him to show you." And eventually they go, "Oh, maybe I'll make an appointment." So Pam Turnock said to me, "Oh, look, I've still got that discharge," and she said, "Oh, well, you better show me." And she went, "Oh, I don't really know if it's appropriate to show you here in the supermarket." "No, probably not. Make an appointment, see me next week." So I started doing the same sort of thing, and word passes around. So the gossip in a small town is quite good, and you can work it to your favour. So now no one would dare ask me what my test results are or something like that. People do, once word does pass around, people are fairly respectful and go, no, I'll see you about that next week, Doc. I won't. Well, there's no use for us to talk about that now. So it's usually not a problem anymore. But it is nice to get out of town and be anonymous again and go to the supermarket without running into the entire town. I went to the local minor 10 to get some fittings for my sprinkler system over the weekend, and I must have stopped and spoken to 10 different people I know. So a 5-minute job took me a good hour and a bit, but it was all fun.
Do you have any other pearls of wisdom or lessons learnt that handy hints to survive rural medicine, other than show me?
Look, there's lots of little things that GPs have told me about over the years that I've put into practice. And some of those are really quite sort of hard lessons. When you go to the pub, you don't get drunk. You go to the pump, you have a few beers, and you go home. I've taken that advice on board early, but of course I've had colleagues that didn't follow that advice, and word gets around town, and it's not the nicest look. I suppose the important little tips are making sure you get away for a weekend every now and again, and leave town and go somewhere where you are anonymous. It is really nice to be able to talk to half your patient load while you're lined up to get your packages at the post office, but it is sort of annoying when you're trying to get in and out of a shop pretty quickly. Most people don't want to talk to you about medicine, though. They ask you how the kids are going or talk to you about other things. But it is nice to be able to get out of town and have a bit of time away so that you can, just switch off and not have to worry about the phone ringing and those sorts of things. I suppose the other thing is learning to cope with treating your friends. So I asked someone very wise early on what I should do, because the general consensus is that, well, if they're your friend, you shouldn't treat them and you shouldn't be their GP. That's impossible when half the town, is in your kids' class at school and you know half of them. So now I just set fairly strict boundaries. And when someone crosses those boundaries, I call it out and say, look, mate, don't call at the house and ask me about your test results. Make an appointment, see me next week. I don't have that sort of stuff on me. I don't have those results on me. It's not appropriate. And word also passes around about that. You can't just call in at the doctor's house and ask him to about your test results. You need to make an appointment. So that hasn't really been an issue for me, within 12 months of arriving.
So boundaries are really important.
Very important to set some boundaries, and the people you're friends with will respect those. It's the people who are sort of casual acquaintances, like the parents in your kids' class, who think it might be a good time to ask, about the details of their colonoscopy result while you're in line for parent-teacher interviews. So you get around that sort of stuff occasionally.
Okay. So one of the things, you've been RDAQ president, you've been RDAA president, thank you very much. Just interested, what did advocacy, or what was your interest in advocacy, and why get involved?
So I was a perpetual whinger is the reason I got involved. So I was like, this is not good enough and we should be getting this, and how am I going to get my patients transferred to the city when they can't get decent PTS, patient travel subsidies, those sorts of things. And while whinging to someone one day, they said to me, you should get involved in the RDAQ. And I was like, who's the RDAQ? And I went along to an RDAQ conference in my second year of being a rural doctor. So in my first year, when I whinged, I was told to get involved with the RDAQ. They can make a difference. So I did, and went along to conference and went, this organisation's great. This is full of people who are like me. They want to try and improve rural practice. They want to try and get a better outcome for their patients. They want to make sure that their patients have got better services in their communities. And that's what rural doctors associations are really all about, is getting better service for your patients and trying to get better conditions so that they can get treated better. And so I was on the management committee as one of, when you whinge a lot and you've got a lot to say, you get asked to be involved in these things. You get jobs. And eventually I was asked to consider nominating as president of RDAQ, and I reluctantly agreed, and that changed my path a fair bit. I found out that small organisations, can hold a lot of power if they say the right things, ask the right questions, and don't just whinge, but go to politicians with solutions. And that's the philosophy I always took on board with the RDAQ, and that's the philosophy I followed on to the RDAA, to have meetings with all these people, but have solutions, go to them with a pre-prepared plan for this is how we might improve things. And I think that's why the RDAA and RDAQ are listened to, is because we go along having already thought about the best solution, and we present it to the politicians in such a way that, it's a good idea. They can't help but want to do it. It's always the way things have worked.
So within your career, you've sort of mixed it up with advocacy, and I know you do a lot of teaching and that sort of thing. How important is it to mix it up?
You've got to do something else other than just medicine. If you go to work every day in a rural spot and you just do the medical side of things, it can wear you down, and I've seen colleagues burn out because they have worked so hard. Whereas if you do other things, you're still working hard. You're just doing advocacy. It's something else other than the day-to-day. It gives you a sense of accomplishment to have tried to help more than just your local community, but rural doctors and rural patients right across the country, and that keeps you going. The same as teaching. It's really important to be involved in teaching. I wouldn't be where I am today if it wasn't for great teachers. So I always aspire to be a great teacher as well. I don't know that I'm very good at it, but I can at least try really hard. And as long as you try hard enough, it will keep you on your toes. Teaching is very important for all doctors, because when you are teaching someone, you really have to understand it. And occasionally you'll find out that there's, something new that's out there that you've maybe missed when you're researching an answer. So I think teaching is really important.
Well, something's going right in St George, because you seem to be able to attract plenty of registrars.
Yeah, we pride ourselves on our teaching and our percentage of people who are passed, and really make sure that we have a good teaching focus in preparing people and registrars, etc., for their exams. But it really keeps you on your toes and keeps you interested in some of the new stuff that's going on. And so teaching is very, very important. Otherwise, medicine gets can trick you up at times if you're not really on the top of your game. So doing other stuff, being involved in the community, being involved in advocacy for your rural patients, and they appreciate it. You know, when they get an increase in whatever, or they hear you on the radio going, yeah, thanks for making sure we got our COVID jabs out here. I don't reckon they were going to give them to us, but I heard you on the radio the other day and that's really good, which is good because when your local patients hear you on the radio, that's also helpful for the fact that they couldn't get in to see you for 3 weeks because you're off in Canberra in some meeting, whereas at least if they heard you on the radio, they knew you were actually doing something worthwhile and trying to help them out.
All right, well, that brings me to the end of sort of the longer questions, but I want to do a quick fire round with you. So quick questions, first thing that pops into your head, okay? Are you ready?
Well, I'm not sure about this one.
All right, well, we'll start easy. Favourite food?
Rice paper rolls.
Okay. Best thing about rural medicine?
Coming home for lunch.
Worst thing about rural medicine?
The on-call.
State of origin, New South Wales or Queensland?
New South Wales. 100%.
Hate you more. Biggest change in rural medicine in the last 5 years?
The biggest change, I think, in my career has been the coordination of retrieval services. So when I first started, they were very uncoordinated, but now they're very coordinated. Biggest change in the last 5 years, wasn't that Adam Coltzau guy, RDAA president back?
Oh, amazing. Favourite holiday destination?
Noosa.
Okay, ending on a big one. FRACMAR, FACRM or FRAC GP?
Well, when you have all of them, they're all equal.
You should be a politician. Good job. Adam, thank you for joining me on the Destination Rural podcast, and I hope for our listeners this has provided some additional insights and some interesting tidbits and guidance in relation to rural careers. But thanks, Adam. I really appreciate it.
Thanks, Peter. Thanks for having me.